Isaias brushing Florida and Georgia with minimal impacts as we expected, and now the tropical storm is taking aim at the Carolinas and the northeastern United States. We are live with the latest model data that you need to know about here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, everybody. JB Buno here with you live in your hurricane headquarters, talking about Isaias, once again being joined here by WFLA meteorologist Ian Oliver, and joining us from Wavy in Virginia, Casey LaHecca, who we'll be hearing from momentarily. But we want to get to the very latest on Isaias. Before we do, quick reminder, we're going to be taking your questions in a meteorologist Q&A here coming up on Tracking the Tropics in about 5-10 minutes time. As soon as we wrap up talking about Isaias, we're going to be taking your questions out of the Facebook Live comment section. Just use the hashtags that you see on your screen. Hashtag Hey Ian or hashtag Hey Casey. But talking about Isaias, minimal impacts here in Florida, and now we're just really talking about the strength of this tropical storm, Ian, as it gets closer to the Carolinas.
JB, yeah, of course, we've been tracking this for several days now. It's been a very interesting storm to watch and a challenging one to forecast, in part because of all the conflicting influences that Isaias has been dealing with over the last several days. Very warm sea surface temperatures, and that's what could allow for some intensification in the short term. All the while, though, we've been tracking that westerly wind shear that's been pressing on the storm and the copious amounts of dry air that we had above us here in Florida that really kind of saved us over the weekend. Very lopsided structure to this system. The center, it did pass about 50 miles or so just off to the east of Cape Canaveral. We saw some tropical storm force gusts along the coast, but because of the lopsided structure of the storm, the worst of this was well offshore, thankfully for our state. But unfortunately, as we'll talk about farther to the north, with a landfalling high-end tropical storm or even a low-end hurricane, those impacts will be much more intense. So this is where we are right now. Motion off to the north at 13 miles per hour. Maximum winds up around 70 miles per hour. The hurricane hunters have had a flight in this storm. That's what they found. Winds likely in the 55 to 65 mile per hour range. This morning, the system was actually significantly weaker, and we've been watching. That's what's been kind of interesting over the last couple of days, in a sense of a pulsing of this storm, and we'll show you why coming up in just a moment. That's the latest radar, which you see some of the heavier rain already finding its way onshore in South Carolina, the Charleston area, seeing some of that heavier rainfall. This is the visible satellite, which looks healthier this afternoon. When I got in this morning, I saw the water vapor, and what I saw was a struggling tropical storm. This tells a lot of the story here. You see all the dry air off to the west. We've had this westerly wind shear pressing on the storm. So what happens is you get showers and thunderstorms that fire up near that center of the circulation. Those thunderstorms get pushed off to the east side of the storm and then rotate around that counterclockwise circulation. They rotate to the north, and now they start encountering some of that dry air. And you saw kind of the dry side of the storm. There isn't a whole lot happening, the western and even the southwestern side of the storm. That was a big part of the reason why we stayed so dry in Florida. Some of that dry air eventually finds its way to the center, briefly weakens the storm. Storm picks up more moisture off of the very warm sea surface temperatures below it, and you see this big flare up in convection. Looks like that could be what we're starting to see a bit this afternoon. This was the latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. This came out at 11 a.m. Just got a positional update and a strength update. Still at 70 miles per hour, but because the wind shear is starting to lessen just a touch, it's still over the very warm sea surface temperatures, 84, 85 degree water. There is a little window here between now and landfall. There isn't much to stop a little bit of intensification, and that's why the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center has this storm back up to low-end Category 1 hurricane status, making a landfall somewhere near Myrtle Beach or Wilmington, North Carolina. Right on that North Carolina-South Carolina border, just to the right of that center is where we'll see the worst of the wind, rain, and storm surge likely. Forecast track from there continues up into Virginia, essentially just west of Norfolk, Hampton Roads area, and then farther off to the northeast from there, racing into New England, still as a tropical storm. That's the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center. You can see this thing cruising off to the north, accelerating through the middle part of the week, eventually heading all the way to Canada. So I wanted to show you this. This is probability of tropical storm force winds, and it's a virtual lock at this point, from coastal parts of South Carolina through a good swath of North Carolina, and then all the way up into Virginia as this system moves essentially right overhead. This is a maximum wind gust product. This is just one forecast model with the forecast radar on there. There you go. By tonight, some wind gusts well up into tropical storm force. perhaps even into hurricane force. You see some of these flashes there, Jacksonville, North Carolina, some wind gusts approaching hurricane force as the system starts to race off to the north. Heavy rainfall, a lot of wind, and some surge with this system, and then there it goes, racing up farther to the north from there. Tropical alerts right now. We do have tropical storm warnings in effect for a good portion of the Georgia coastline up into the South Carolina coastline. That little swath of red right along that North Carolina-South Carolina border, that is a hurricane warning in effect, as the National Hurricane Center is anticipating a little bit of additional strengthening in the short term. We don't have that much time now until landfall. Looks like probably 12 hours or less until we see this thing move on shore, where the weakening process will begin at that point. But there you go. That swath of orange all the way up into the northeast. New York is a point of reference for JB, Boston for me, and points north from there. There's a tropical storm watch in effect right now in Maine. So that's just telling you the broad scope of this system, wide-ranging impacts all the way up the eastern seaboard expected. What's most important here, though, is what we'll be watching in terms of surge. Surge is always the most dangerous part of a tropical system. Just to the right of that center of circulation, where we'll see the strongest winds pushing the water on shore, the water starts piling up. That's what we'll be watching for a concern tonight. I did look up the tide cycle in Myrtle Beach, and it looks like low tide occurs right as this thing's making landfall. So some great news with that, thankfully. Rainfall forecast, that'll be a big issue. Going right over the top of Norfolk, Casey. 3 to as much as 6 inches or more locally. Expecting, unfortunately, some direct impacts for your area. What's your latest thoughts?
Right. So, as the storm system kind of continues to ramp up a little bit here, we're watching for some heavy rainfall all across our region, but even a little bit to the west now as it takes more of that inland track here. We're thinking that certainly we're going to be getting some of that heavy rainfall right along the I-95 corridor. And as we go into, the next few hours here, what we're going to be looking at is rain, not so much yet, but as we go into tonight and then into tomorrow morning, that's really going to be the impacts from this system, is when we get into mid-morning tomorrow and also into the early afternoon hours is what we're looking at here. So going into about 8, 9, 10 o'clock. And 10 o'clock is when we have high tide. So, as this storm system speeds up a little bit, that could potentially become a problem for some areas, low-lying areas. We're obviously a very coastal town. So that could be some of the impacts that we're looking at as the system does speed up a little bit. And I wouldn't be surprised if we started to see some of those hurricane watches or warnings even into parts of our area as well, because it does that track now keeping it as a Category 1 all the way up to the state line. So really maintaining some of that strength that we thought might die off when it does come into contact with the land. So that's something that we'll be keeping an eye on as well if we do get any of those hurricane watches and warnings, if any of those problems would ramp up a little bit.
And we're going to take your questions, everybody, here for all the meteorologists that you have on your screen. I am not one of them, being joined by two of the best, though, WFLA meteorologist Ian Oliver and Wavy meteorologist Casey LaHecka, joining us from Norfolk, Virginia, that area, everybody. So the first question that's actually coming in, it is a hashtag HeyJB question, but I'm going to throw it over to Casey because this is, of course, a Virginia-based question. Becky Goff is asking, what are the impacts for Virginia? So what do you think you're going to be seeing over the next 48 hours in Virginia, Casey?
Yeah, really good question, because the impacts are widespread across the state. We're looking at, the Richmond area could see anywhere from 4 to 6, maybe even higher rainfall totals there, because it's right along that I-95 corridor where the center of that storm takes it up. Whereas the coastline area, which typically is the one that gets hit the hardest from these storms, especially for rainfall, might be on the lower end. You see some of that darker green coloring, and that's showing kind of those lower totals. And so right along the water, I think that's what we're going to be looking at, is kind of the center of the storm here going a little bit further inland. And so for areas, into Suffolk, parts of Franklin, areas right along the I-95 corridor, the greater impacts there than even what some of parts of the Outer Banks could be getting, which is typically the hardest hit area. So impacts really widespread across Virginia, but we're looking at winds up to 65, even up to 70 miles an hour at time, wind gusts. So certainly that is tropical storm force winds, if not a Category 1 force winds there. So we're looking at impacts that could cause some damage and also some localized flooding in low-lying areas. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at just the long-lasting rainfall throughout much of the morning and those winds as well.
Again, as a reminder, everybody, taking your questions for our two meteorologists on your screen. Ian Oliver, Casey Laheka, joining us from Wavy in Virginia, everybody, via Skype. So if you want to ask a question to one of our two meteorologists on screen, just use the hashtags that you see on the right side of your screen or in the pinned comment on Facebook Live. Hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey Casey. The next question coming in, it's for hashtag Hey Ian from Angela Capiello. How about Jacksonville, North Carolina, Ian? That's north of Wilmington, the Carolina coast there in North Carolina.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've talked a lot about the right side and the wrong side of the storm, the dirty side and the dry side. Unfortunately, with the latest forecast track, which you could actually see Jacksonville, North Carolina in that forecast that I showed just a few moments ago. I'll try to get that pulled up for you. Unfortunately, it's looking like Jacksonville, North Carolina is going to be on the right side of the system, the advancing side of the storm, which features the higher wind gusts, likely the heavier rainfall tallies, depending on the exact track of this system. And also some surge concerns. That's why we have the storm surge warnings up for the East Coast. 2 to a 4 foot surge. So monitor your local tide cycles there. That's going to be very important as we see this system approaching. That looks like 2 a.m. So the rain's picking up. Likely some gusty winds for that area, 40 up to 60 miles per hour or more with some gusts. I don't think we'll see sustained winds approaching that, but this is a wind gust product that you're seeing there. So unfortunately, Jacksonville, you got to have your plan in place at this point, as you will likely see the more direct of the impacts from this system.
The next question coming in from Wavy's Facebook page over there in Virginia, in Casey's neck of the woods, from Connie Walker. Hashtag Hey Casey, when will this hit the Eastern Shore?
Yeah, good question. So the timing of this really has been speeding up a little bit. So it looks like that we're going to start to see some of the impacts on the Eastern Shore, maybe around 8, 9 o'clock would be the heaviest of the rain. But even earlier than that, we'll see some of the outer bands. So by 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. But then as it starts to move out pretty quickly, by lunchtime, I think most of the region we'll start to see, the worst of the storm is going to be over with by that point. So Eastern Shore is certainly going to get some rain, but because they're kind of on the outer edge of that, I don't think it will be the worst of the storm there, really depending on location of the Eastern Shore, though. Parts of the Maryland Eastern Shore will get a little bit heavier rainfall than parts of the Virginia Eastern Shore.
The next question is coming in from Aretha Yates from WNCT's Facebook page. That's in North Carolina. Let's see if we can bring that up, everybody, on your screen. There is Aretha's comment. Hashtag Hey Casey, what is expected inland in Bertie County in North Carolina? Some more inland there in North Carolina. What do we tell to Aretha, joining us from WNCT's Facebook page in North Carolina? Casey.
Yeah. So Bertie County is one that we do cover because it is just on the outskirts of our coverage area there. And so kind of what we're expecting for Bertie would be the heavy rainfall, but also because it is inland and, this storm is taking more of an inland track now, we can't completely rule out those possible quick spin-ups or tornadoes that would happen very quickly. So something also that, a lot of our area could be dealing with as well. For Bertie County, though, the rainfall total is going to be anywhere between about 2 to 4 inches of rain, maybe somewhere a little bit higher than that. But for the most part, a lot of rain just widespread throughout much of the morning hours into the early afternoon, the higher wind gusts, 65 miles an hour, and then the possibility of those quick spin-ups. And I think that's kind of, a lot of people hear the word tornado when we talk about some of these storms, and a lot of people getting hung up on that maybe. And these are very quick spin-ups, but they can do some damage. So especially when these hurricanes take that more of that inland track, that's something that we're always keeping an eye on.
All right, the next question's coming in, everybody, from Marcia Bright Kibler from WFLA's Facebook page in Tampa. Hashtag Hey Ian, what are you seeing for the lower Eastern Shore? Caroline County, Maryland is the area that Marcia's asking about.
All right, so we're talking for coastal areas on the right side of the storm, so we're talking about similar impacts from wind, but also from surge. I'll get the track pulled up, and we'll take a look up towards the Delmarva. There we go, right there.
My old neck of the woods, the Delmarva Peninsula there, Eastern Shore, Maryland, as well as coastal Virginia and Delaware as well.
Very nice. There you go. There's the timeline on that. So we're talking about just a little bit later than what we were talking about previously for the Norfolk area, likely more towards lunchtime. We should talk about the accelerating speed of this system. That is a good thing when it comes in terms of rainfall. We're going to see some of these wind gusts out of that, 40 to 60 miles per hour. Still looking at a pretty healthy tropical storm passing over the Delmarva at that point. The National Hurricane Center forecast still at 65 miles per hour. So we'll call it some gusts up to around 65 miles per hour. If you live in a coastal area, surge will be a concern with this as the size of the system gets broader. Right now, the tropical storm force winds extend out about 125 miles from that center of circulation. You can expect that system to broaden out, though, as it continues to make its way up the east coast of the United States. But unfortunately, with a track to your west, that northeastern quadrant, the advancing side of the storm, likely where we're going to see some of the gustier winds, which can act to generate a larger surge, some higher wind gusts. Rainfall, the bulk of that may be a little bit farther to your west, at least the higher tallies with that. I want to talk briefly, that kind of jogged my memory about this. There's a lot going on with this graphic, so I apologize. But we're talking about the acceleration of the storm and the opportunity for it to strengthen in the short term. Last few days, we've been talking about the wind shear out of the west-southwest, pushing on the system, inhibiting its development a touch because it's been allowing some of that dry air to get entrained into the center of circulation. What's happening now is this gets scooped up by an upper-level trough, and you can see that dip kind of over the Mississippi, that kind of U in the wind particles that you see there. West-southwest wind pushing on the system, that is now becoming the actual motion of the storm. So when we talk about wind shear, we're talking about the change in wind, not only with wind speed, but with direction. So what's been happening over the last couple of days, as you move upstairs in the atmosphere, aloft, we've had wind direction changing and we've had wind speed changing, which that kind of helps to tear up a system. That is not what tropical systems like. They like the absence of wind shear, which allows it to get vertically organized, kind of stacked up, and then the storm system can intensify from there. Now, though, we've got the storm moving from southwest to the northeast. We've got the wind direction aloft, although that there is some speed there, about 25 knots as told by the National Hurricane Center. At least it's in the same direction. So that's going to allow this system, at least in the short term before it makes landfall, to organize itself a little bit more. That's why you see in the forecast there. Right now you're seeing Tropical Storm Isaias. It's Hurricane Isaias forecast to make landfall from the National Hurricane Center. One other thing that we should point out, which I think is why the Hurricane Center has been hesitant to make big fluctuations with the intensity of the system, even though we have seen this system redlining a bit, getting stronger, getting weaker, getting stronger, getting weaker. They've left it around 7. The difference between a tropical storm with max sustained winds of 70 and a hurricane with 75, the difference is that name only. These impacts are exactly the same. So as we move through this next 12 hours waiting on a landfall, I really wouldn't get hung up on that. Yes, the possibility is there for it to get a little bit stronger, but plan for the impacts that we've discussed regardless. It really doesn't matter what this thing's called when it moves on shore. JB.
And we are expecting, of course, a landfall event with Isaias. Again, taking your questions here with the hashtags you see on your screen. Hashtag Hey Ian, hashtag Hey Casey. And we're going to give you a 2-for-1 here, Casey, because we have a couple of your Facebook fans over there in Wavy in Virginia that are asking about power outages specifically. So let's get a couple those questions in here. Tell Nisha Jensen from Wavy's Facebook page in Virginia, hashtag Hey Casey, is Hampton going to experience tidal flooding and power outages? And then secondly, here from Kimberly Fitzpatrick, also from Wavy's Facebook page, hashtag Hey Casey, will there be power outages in Chesapeake? So we have 2 areas here being asked about here, Casey.
Right, exactly. So power outages certainly going to be a big concern for us, I think, because of the wind, because of just the strength of this storm and how widespread it is expected to be. You know, and especially in isolated areas, we've had several storms, just regular storms, not tropical storms, the past couple of days, about a week now, that have been some really heavy downpours. So some areas are still pretty soggy while others are bone dry still. And so it really could impact either way. You know, if an area is really dry, that could help pull trees down pretty quickly, which would cause more power outages. And also if in areas that have been soaked for the past couple of days, then they might also, you know, have some power outages there. So kind of both ends of the spectrum on that, unfortunately. And so power outage is certainly going to be a concern, something that you do want to just keep in mind if you have a lot of food in your fridge, maybe that you're worried about eating some of that up tonight before things ramp up a little bit tomorrow in case the fridge does go out. Have a generator ready if you do have one of those. And also the tidal flooding. No, it's not going to be the biggest problem I think that we're worried about. It's not going to be a widespread problem because high tide is around 10 a.m. It's actually one of the lower high tides. It's not even going to be close to that threshold. And so it's not going to be a huge concern, but certainly southern Virginia Beach and the parts of Pungo, Sandbridge area, just the typical spots that do flood out when we get even just a normal rain, certainly could be dealing with that kind of thing, but it's not going to be the worst flooding that we've ever seen with a tropical storm or with a hurricane, like JB and Ian were saying with the name of it. Yes, even if it is a Category 1 hurricane, impact still very similar to what we've been talking about all along. So yeah, it has that possibility of seeing some tidal flooding, but it's not going to be for everyone.
Next question's coming in. Let's see here from Edwin Labrador, senior from WTNH in Connecticut. Hashtag Hey Ian, what should Connecticut expect on the shore?
All right, yeah, it's been quite a while. I was trying to think back to when the last time we were talking about tropical storm warnings for that part of the country. You have to go back. There may be one in the mix, but I remember...
Because when you're talking about Connecticut, you're talking about really the entire tri-state area of New York, New Jersey,
yes,
New York,
and
Long Island.
up into New England from there because of the fast motion of the system. I remember I was working at Channel 3 News, WCAX in Vermont, covering Irene back in 2011. That was a tropical, yeah, that was a tropical storm when it moved through, put down 3 to as much as 7 or so inches of rain. Of course, on top of that topography, it created horrible flooding, unfortunately, for many towns, washed out a lot of roads, part of the interstate. Heading into Connecticut, see if I can get you zoomed in there a little bit. We'll get you backed up. I can answer this question because my family in Massachusetts has been asking me the similar question. We're going to have to wait to get the exact track. That's going to have a lot to do with...
Well, you know what? I'm going to throw this your way because we also have Carly Lloyd from WWLP in Massachusetts asking #HeyJB, how should Western Mass be impacted by Wednesday or Thursday? So we have some questions now coming in from the northeastern United States. We're talking about Connecticut. We're talking about Massachusetts. We're talking about other states up there in the northeast that are in the track of Tropical Storm Isaias as of now.
Yeah, Carly in Springfield, must be Springfield area, my home state. It's really not Wednesday and Thursday because of the acceleration of the storm that we talked about. If you can see the forecast track here, it's 8 o'clock Tuesday that the center of circulation is really rolling right through Connecticut and western Massachusetts. It's going to be in and out, this system. Very fast-moving storm at that point. You can see in between Virginia and Connecticut, we're talking about 12 hours of storm motion. That storm is moving up the East Coast and then eventually up into Maine and Canada by Wednesday morning. But the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center is still with some wind gusts up to around 60 miles per hour at that point. You can expect a quick shot of some heavy rainfall, likely some very gusty winds, but they're not going to last. So that is going to be the issue. How well does this system hold together? How far inland does it go? And what kind of state is it in at that point once it gets all the way up there? That's a long way up the East Coast. But at this point, the latest forecast would be you can expect deteriorating conditions through the second half of the day on Tuesday, and then especially the afternoon, the evening hours. That's when you're going to have some very gusty winds and a batch of some heavy rainfall rolling through that part of the country.
Next question we have coming in is for Casey. #Casey. Is Rhode Island expecting any of this? This is coming from Joseph Maldonado on WPRI's Facebook page in Rhode Island. Casey, we know you have your hands full with really focusing on your viewers there in Virginia. What do we say to Joseph and whether or not Rhode Island is expecting any of this?
Yeah, Rhode Island's certainly going to experience some rain, some wind, but as the system continues to move over land, the good news is that we will start to see some weakening. So yes, they're still in that path of seeing some parts of this tropical storm. It's not going to be a direct hit by any mean. It's going to be, just widespread rainfall for a time. Really could not even have some tropical characteristics at that point. Could be more of just a very typical storm. So certainly nothing to completely worry about for Rhode Island. Not anything that you need to hunker down and prepare for. But yeah, it's going to make for not a great beach day, and you're going to have a lot of rain from this and a lot of wind. So yeah,
it's like a strong nor'easter. It's like a strong nor'easter at that point rolling through.
Yeah.
They did extend the tropical storm warning for all of Rhode Island and all of Massachusetts, with a watch is now in effect for all of New Hampshire and Maine. So wait and see how this develops. But yes, you're going to see some rain and wind coming through for sure.
And the final question that we have coming in here on Tracking the Tropics is from Jackie Palmer from WCBD's Facebook page in Charleston. Hashtag Hey Ian, could it still turn inland and make landfall in Charleston?
So I just got the cone pulled back up. Charleston is now outside of the cone, which the forecast cone isn't always an absolute. About a third of the time the center of the storm can actually exit the cone, but we've seen quite a tightening of the forecast models. The forecast track of this, especially in the short term, it looks like a track more towards Myrtle Beach, which would keep the worst of the surge east of Charleston. But you got a high-end tropical storm 100 miles, 150 miles now off to the south. You really need to be watching this thing. I know the conditions where you're watching from probably have been deteriorating pretty quickly as I get that radar pulled back up. There you go. Yeah, a north motion. It looks like the center of the storm is almost due south of Charleston at this point. I would expect to see even just eyeball tests. This is sliding off to the east of Charleston. Be vigilant, be prepared for that, but I think you'd have to get pretty unlucky at this point for that to happen, as it's getting picked up by those winds I showed you, more out of the southwest now, pushing that system a little bit farther off to the east.
Casey, before we say farewell, your thoughts here just about a landfall event occurring and what folks in Virginia should be watching out for.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, everyone has been, hearing about this for several days now. And as it gets closer to landfall, we'll really see kind of what happens when it does interact with land. It has made, a little bit of some changes here over water with that strengthening as well. So that will impact areas that it does make landfall in. And then as it interacts with land, we'll really have to be keeping a close eye on that. But be prepared for the heavy rain. I would not try to head out and go driving anywhere tomorrow, especially in the morning hours. It's just going to be one of those days where you do want to stay inside. Make sure you have everything kind of indoors that could be blown away by the winds, trash cans, any yard furniture, that kind of things. Just be prepared for the heavy rain, the wind gusts, the possibility of some localized flooding. And also, don't be shocked by any quick spin-up tornadoes. The National Weather Service could easily put out some tornado warnings pretty quickly, and that's when we go on air pretty much wall to wall at that point. So yeah, those are going to be possibilities for tomorrow, and something that we all need to be prepared for and just keep our eyes on.
As we continue, of course, to keep our eyes here on Isaias, a tropical storm that may or may not reach hurricane status again ahead of its landfall as expected in the Carolinas. We're going to continue to keep you posted here, everybody, with all the latest model data here on Tracking the Tropics. Every one of our streams will be taking a very, very close analytical approach to what Isaias is doing with our team of meteorologists joining us from across the country. But as a reminder, we are here to spread good information, credible information from our meteorologists. This isn't here to spook anybody or get anybody too frightened or anything like that. This is all about making sure that you are aware of the latest information coming in from the National Hurricane Center as broken down by our meteorologists such as Ian and Casey to keep you aware, alert, informed, educated on the latest so that you guys are staying safe wherever you're joining us from. And when you look at all the watches and warnings up and down the East Coast, this is a storm that's going to impact a lot of folks, a lot of families out there. So remember, Tracking the Tropics is here just to keep everybody in tune with good information as we continue to get up-to-date information from the models that are coming in regularly. For Ian Oliver, here at WFLA News Channel 8, and Casey LaHecca joining us from Wavy, meteorologist there in Virginia. We can't thank you enough for being here on Tracking the Tropics. We'll be back in about 24 hours from now or sooner, depending on the tropical updates that we get. As a reminder, we're always here to stream at a moment's notice from your hurricane headquarters to provide you with the very latest if you need to know about it. So for Ian and Casey, I'm JB. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon next time on Tracking the Tropics.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.